Okay, a couple tips for getting the most out of the title reveal category. And there are 9 different titles in here. I've already added them to my timeline just by pressing Q for each of them, and they're in order, the same order that they appear here in the titles browser. The first one's called bar expeller background, and the text expels from this graphic with a background. And the second one's called bar expeller tracking, which means there's some animated tracking. The text kind of bounces out and settles down afterwards. Other than that, these are very similar. They both have an on-screen control for both scale and position. You'll notice if I scale this down, let's say I want to use it as a lower third, and move it, it seems to break apart. But fear not, if you click in the timeline, it will all reset and everything will be fine. It'll be there at the bottom and work just fine. So in the title inspector, first we have the animate on and off options, so it doesn't have to animate on or off. You can turn those off. And the option to blur the video, which is off by default. And then we have blocks of parameters. We have text parameters, bar parameters, which is this white bar at the left, the block parameters, which is the red box behind it, and shadow parameters. All pretty straightforward, just a couple little quick things. So I'll change the text to say, good morning, LA, and maybe I'll change the font to something else, and I can play with the size and maybe something like that. Now, the direction and speed, rather than popping out from the right, we could pop out from the left and maybe at a medium speed, and then we'd want to move the whole thing over, click in the timeline, and it'll pop out to the left instead. So easy to switch the directions and set a different speed. This padding, text position padding, refers to moving the text closer or farther away from that bar in the context of its background, so you can move it up or down as well. Usually you don't need to adjust these at all. You can keep them there the way they are by default. You don't have to have the bar. You can make it disappear, and then you'll just have the text come out like that. If you don't want the bar, if you do want the bar, you can change its color and its width. So in this case, if I want to make it very fat, then I might want to adjust the bar position to move it over so it doesn't interfere with the text. So we could do something like that. The block parameters, we don't have to have a block either. They could be just on a transparent background like that. So it's a totally different look, but looks quite nice like that, I think. But if we do choose to show it, we can adjust its opacity. We can add an outline around it and adjust the width of that outline. In fact, if we make that outline bigger, we want to adjust the size of that bar. So there's a bar size adjust. I can open that up and say I want to make it a little taller to match the outline there, maybe just a little bit taller. And why? About like that. What else about the block? So we've got padding on the block as well. So we can add a little bit of padding. We could do that so it gets the outline to show there. And then we can add a drop shadow and blur it and move it further away, for example. I'll get rid of that. So should be pretty straightforward on how to use that. The next one is the bar expeller, which works similarly, except it has this nice opening tracking animation. If you don't like that tracking animation, you can set this track in, for example, to 0. And then it won't do the tracking. It'll just come out just like the first one. But I actually like to add a little bit of tracking in there for both in and out. It has the same speed parameters, position padding for how close it is to the bar or where it is in relationship to the bar. So for example, let's do something here. Good morning. And this one, you can move and scale. There's no masks involved, so everything moves. You don't need to do anything to update it. It just updates by itself very nicely and easily. Has the same bar parameters that you can adjust, shadow parameters, and you can choose to blur the video. So once you know how to use the first one, you'll know how to use this one. Okay, now this multi-graphic background. Let's zoom in a little bit in the timeline so you can see the full name of the title, multi-graphic background. This is a little different if you use previous versions of TitleMations, because now you can choose this graphic that reveals the text. In this case, it's a bracket that draws on, but in the title inspector, under the graphic section here, we've got different options. So for instance, angle brackets, I'm going to play that. or diamonds, hexagons, a line, a slash, forward or back. So many different options, including a drop zone where you can add your own graphic. So if I select that and scroll down, there's a place to put an object in there. And let's do it real quickly. I'll go to the library here and then click back on the title. Scroll down, click on the drop zone well, and select this baseball. Apply clip. And now under the drop zone well, there are parameters for scaling. So I'll scale that baseball down, and we can choose how far out it goes. So now that we've got that in there, let's change the title to Good Morning. And maybe we want to make it smaller. Then we can also take these guys, bring them in and make them smaller. And we can also adjust where all this stuff lives. So I can move this up so it's perfectly centered relative to these guys. Great. So now we have Good Morning Baseball. But you can put anything in there, a graphic or anything else. Let's go back to our drop zone. We'll stay there, but let's say it's these little stars, and let's make them yellow. Okay, and let's change the font as well. And the size. Oops. Bring this text size down a little bit, or let's bring it up and bring these guys out. Okay, everything else in here should be self-explanatory. Instead of splitting from the center like it does now, so these graphics come up and it splits from the center, you could choose, for instance, slide right, and now it works kind of like the Expeller in that we only see one side. Now, when you do this, you need to adjust this guy using the on-screen control. This control over here moves everything. If we click in the screen, it will update properly. And there we have it up over in the top left. This bottom one adjusts the text position, which usually you don't need to do. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Graphic rotation. If you don't like the way the star is pointing, we can change that. We have options for the animation speed. If the graphics start, let's look at this. I'll show you how graphic start works. If we go back to, instead of this slide right, a center split, and let's bring the whole thing back over. And these can bring back in, and let's click in the timeline to update. When these stars start coming in, you can change on the graphic start how far apart they are. So we might want them to look more like that, for instance. Depends on the symbol you're using. So now they'll just come in a little bit differently, but it doesn't change where they end up. Let's make them end up right there. And that's independent of how they start. Same thing with the end. You can change a little bit about how they end here, but that you can just drag right on the on-screen control as well. Then there are some controls that are specific to the graphic you've chosen. So for instance, if you chose to use angle brackets, let's go back to the type and choose angle brackets. And we've changed the rotation, so I'll set that back to 0. This will control the width of those angle brackets or the roundness of those angle brackets. So some of these are specific to the type of object you've chosen, or a bracket would refer to these original brackets right here. If I go to bracket, this bracket roundness affects the roundness here of these brackets, or the bracket width of just those guys. The graphic size applies to any graphic, so we can make these much bigger or smaller. So hopefully that makes sense. And the line width applies if you chose to use the line object here. We can adjust the width of that line. Finally, symbol, if you've chosen the type of graphic to be quote or symbol, you can put any symbol in here. It's a quote by default, but I'll delete that and go up to the edit menu and choose emoji and symbols. And then you can put any symbol in here that you want. So let's say I want this bell. I'll double click. And now we have this bell in here as a symbol. And I'll move the text up to match, and then move the whole thing down, and click over in the timeline. So you can use any symbol that's available in emoji and symbols as the object that reveals the text. Okay, that was the most complicated one. Multi-graphic reveal is almost exactly the same, except that it doesn't have this background element that this one does. So there's no option to work with a background. It's just on transparency. The next three are similar. Reveal left, reveal vertical left is what it says here, and reveal vertical right. Both these guys animate on with some tracking animation. If you don't want it to do that, what you can do is adjust the tracking amount. So as I set that to 0, then instead of tracking in, it'll just slide right in without that tracking going on. I can move these up over here. So that's the key thing I want you to get out of that, is you can adjust whether that in tracking happens or not by the tracking amount, track in amount. Other things, so text parameters like we have everywhere else. You can change the text right here, font size, color position. You can adjust the starting position. So what I mean by that is down in the line parameters, you have an optional line that reveals the text. Let's change the color to make it more obvious. Line color, I'll make it white. And we can adjust its starting and ending points. Let's change the text here. Good morning. Wish I could type, sorry about that. And you can see how this can be similar to the bar that we were using before. It's very similar if you just do a single line. You don't have to do 3 lines, but you could do many, many lines. And I'll bring this tracking in amount down. It's way too much right now. But it's very close to that bar. So what I can do is use this start position, end position adjust. Sorry, that's not correct. We want to go to the line gap, and there we can move this over so the line, we have a gap from the line. And we can also adjust the point Y to make this line match this text here. So now it's very similar to the Expeller, but notice at the beginning the text is already out there. And that's what this starting position adjust is for. I can move it so it hides from that line. So now it properly pops out, hangs out, and slides back again. And at the very end, let's go back one frame. On the very end, we can adjust the ending position adjustment. Because I don't know how long a text line you're going to use, you can use the starting position adjust, ending position adjust to make sure that the text is hidden before it comes in or out. So as many lines as text as you want, you can choose whether or not it does that animation. And whether or not you see this line is optional as well. And blurring the video underneath is optional. So same idea with that with reveal right. Reveal up, the only difference here is reveal up has a little pop-up. It's kind of like the tracking idea, but vertically. So it has that little pop-up. And there's a bounce on amount. So you can bring that down if you don't like the bouncing happening. And we can also choose, rather than each word coming up, the whole line can come up if you just want something simple. And by the same token as the other ones, there's a line that you can choose to reveal. Any color and any size, we can adjust the points here if we want it to reveal it from a line. I'm going to add a little bit of bounce back in there, in the bounce in. And just a little bit of bounce there. You can crank that up and have it go out quickly. So that's pretty much it. Text parameters, just like everywhere else. Animate on parameters. You can choose the spread if you're doing, for instance, a letter at a time. So we do a character at a time, and we'll increase the spread and increase the bounce amount. And we've got something that looks a little different with each letter coming on from the beginning to the end. We could also go, say, backwards or center to ends. So let's do that and really crank up the bounce amount a bit more. And that's going from center to ends. If I bring the spread down, it'll look like each letter animating on almost independently like that. So it can be playful or it can be serious. It's easy to change the character of it by adjusting these animate on parameters. Animate off does the exact same thing in reversed. And then if you do have a lowercase, for instance, this guy doesn't have any lowercase letters, but let's put a G in there and let's change the font to something that has lowercase, like let's say Futura, but let's put a small g. Now that g is hidden. So in this case, we would want to make an adjustment for that lowercase. So I'll drag on here so you can see the whole G so that it gets fully revealed. So that's what that lowercase adjustment is for. You can also adjust the starting position if you've got a lot of lines of text. So if I copy this and make a second line of text, then by default at the very first frame we already see it. So we'd want to use the starting position adjust to move everything down below and have it all pop up. And then our ending position adjust, we need everything to be fully revealed so we can move it up. And I'm going to need to play with that to make sure that it's working correctly. Okay, next one is sliding bar. So a bar animates on and drops down to reveal the text. And the text does a similar pop-up. So this is very similar in terms of making changes so it can pop up or not, and it's popping up by word. So these are the same general set of parameters that we saw before. And the final one, split bars, has two separate bars that split and open. And this has an on-screen control for scale and position. And again, if you change it, it may look like it's not working, but if you click in the timeline, it will update correctly. So let's change these bars here, just so they stand out a little bit more. And I'll make this a little bigger and move it back up again. And you have a lot of control here over the width of these lines. They can be very thick for a graphic look or very thin. And you can choose how far away they come from the text. So you might want them very tight like that. And they can be longer than the text too. So we could do something like that where they're very thin, but very tight. And let's try that. So I think that looks nice. One thing you might want to do is you might not like the text to animate on. So the text kind of drops down there. So in order to change that, there's a starting position adjustment. Just set that to 0. That's how far up in the air those letters are by default. So if I set it to 0, they just are right there and not moving at all. And the rest of these parameters should be self-explanatory based on what we've already gone through. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. So that was some tips on how to get the most out of the title reveal category of titles in TitleMations.